as well as some other huge stories that I want to cover. To go through that, I have Julio Rosas joining me. Julio, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So just some background for my audience. Julio is a journalist, author of the book Fiery but Mostly Peaceful. He works with the Blaze, also the Manhattan Institute. He's currently in Mexico covering the migrant caravans and what their thoughts are on Donald Trump. Julio, I want to jump right into a massive story. Breaking news. The assassin of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, has been captured after an elderly person at McDonald's in Pennsylvania recognized his face and called the police. What were your thoughts on this whole assassin situation in New York City, right on the streets of New York? What was your take on that?
Well, I mean, it's pretty stark, right? I mean, this is something that you don't typically see, right? I mean, when it comes to gun violence in general in the United States, we think of it as gang related. We think of it, mass shootings in that, but this is very specifically targeted. It appears to be very specifically targeted against Thompson, and so. One, it was just kind of crazy to see that for it to be on video, even as low quality as that video was. And then also just how the suspect was able to evade for quite a bit of time. Again, we'll see what happens if this person is indeed the suspect. But I mean, it speaks to how the deep problems, the big problems that people face in the country. There is that concern that if it's not being met in the way that they want to exactly, then they can take pretty decisive action, pretty extreme actions, right? And it just speaks to, I think, the volatility within the country still. I mean, I know that a lot of people want to blame Trump for that. Obviously, that's not the case. There's been extreme acts long before he's been in office. But I think, I think we just have to know exactly. We have to hear from him, right? If this is the guy that they've caught, why'd you do this? And how were you able to do this? What type of weapon did he use? Because obviously there's still a lot of debate over what exactly he used. And then, you have the gun control groups calling for a ban on silencers and all this. And so it definitely, as with all of these big stories, there's a lot of angles to analyze this from and to see, okay, what led to this? Okay, and how did it happen? Why did it happen? And then what can we do in the future to, prevent something like this from happening again?
Yeah, let me get some details here because the Daily Mail is going out on a limb with their lawyers approving the release of this. They are saying that allegedly 26-year-old Luigi Mangione is the person who had the gun. Of course, afterwards, fleeing for his life, finding a fake ID. Then they find a backpack full of Monopoly money. Now they have found a manifesto about his anger against healthcare companies, insurance companies. Again, we don't want to 100% assume, so we'll use the word alleged, but it is looking like they have caught this person. Speaking of big things in New York City, we're just coming off of this big trial, a murder trial, where you had Daniel Penny, a former Marine, who chokes out a black man who was terrorizing subway riders in New York. Ultimately, the death of this man didn't even come from this Marine, Daniel Penny. Now you have Black Lives Matter organization calling for riots, violence, vigilante justice in New York, saying that no black people are safe in New York. What are your thoughts on this big story?
Yeah, I mean, I've been covering the BLM movement for a while. I mean, it really came into prominence obviously in 2020, and I covered as many of those as I could, starting in Minneapolis, but then I went on to Seattle with Chaz, Kenosha, Kyle Rittenhouse. I saw him do it. Atlanta, Washington D.C., New York. I mean, I went all over the country, and I mean, it's not surprising, right? It's not surprising that they would react this way, just because that's kind of their primed reaction. That's what they're always. If we don't get justice in the courts, then we're going to have to get justice out into the streets. I mean, and that's what they were calling that before. But obviously now that Penny he has been found not guilty on both accounts. I think that just shows that they believe, and that far left movement as a whole, they believe that in order for change to happen, they need to get violence, right? They need to, at a minimum, be disruptive in daily life. And we've been seeing that with the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian movement since October 7th of last year, right? I've been covering a lot of those things as well. And a lot of times when people, when they react, whether they're shutting down traffic or whether they're setting things on fire, or, there's kind of this reaction to say, well, why are you doing this? You're not going to convince anybody to get onto your side. And the answer is they're not doing that to convince anybody. They're doing it, one, out of anger, but two, they're just doing it because they want to make regular Americans' lives miserable to the point where they'll just give in to whatever demands that particular group is asking for. And so obviously in this case, it's even going further than that. I mean, it's not even disruption. I mean, you have his supporters, Jordan Neely supporters, calling to kill white people out of revenge. I mean, and that is, I mean, those are threats. Those are serious threats that need to be taken very seriously. Need to be, if we had any sense of a non-two-tier justice system, federal law enforcement should be looking into that. And maybe with the change in the administration, and let's say Kash Patel is the FBI director, maybe they will kind of take that network on more, because that network stayed intact after 2020. I mean, you had the BLM, like the main official group. They had their scandals with the money that they spent on and everything. But the decentralized activist network largely stayed intact. I mean, because when you look at Portland and all these other cities, when people were arrested during the riots, they were often let go. And so there wasn't any long-term consequences for their actions. And so again, that's why they get reinforced with their belief that, okay, we can go out and do stuff, and even if we get caught, even if we get arrested, because in the name of restorative justice, because in the name of equity, racial equity, we can just be let out and be able to do it again. So this is something now, to be clear, I don't know. I think it's a little too cold for any major riots. I don't expect anything to be at the same level as 2020 in reaction to this, but you just never know, right? And the fact that they're willing to publicly, without hiding their identity, that we want riots, we want white people to be killed in revenge. I mean, that says how bold that they are.
Yeah. Do you see President Trump in his second term cracking down on these violent, damaging, fiery protests harder than he did? I think in 2020, he called for it, but tried to let cities and mayors and governors handle things themselves. But he always seemed to publicly comment. Do you think this next term he will crack down on these governors and mayors and call for, we have a right to protest. We don't have a right to call for the murder of a skin color, for the murder of a gender, for, the burning of police stations, things like that. What do you think Trump will be like in his second term?
I mean, I think so. And the reason why I say that is because the tone has changed very drastically on sanctuary cities when it comes to immigration, right? Because you're right. In 2020, he definitely wanted the governors and the mayors to be the lead on this, and it was always backed up. If you don't do this, then I'll come in and federalize the National Guard and do all and take charge. That didn't really happen, and so I think with the change in the more aggressive stance that he has towards sanctuary city mayors and governors who aren't going to play ball with his plans for immigration. I can very easily see that Kash Patel, other people within federal law enforcement, that's going to be a changing of the guard. I think at least that should happen, right? Because like I just said, there were no major long-term consequences for the vast majority of people who decided to riot in 2020. And of course, we saw all the excuses being made for that, especially during the pandemic, right? I mean, that was my favorite thing was I was able to, quote unquote, be out there to cover a protest with all these people when we were technically supposed to be staying home. But then those same people, you had doctors coming out and saying, well, but you can't spend time with your family for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Even though I'd be around much fewer people at that event, even with air travel. So I think a lot of people are fed up with that. That's why the election outcome was the way that it was. And so I think Trump is he got shot at, for Pete's sake. I mean, the second alleged shooter was he was copying Democratic talking points, saying democracy is at stake. We have to defend democracy, which is exactly what the Democrats, the national platform, was saying. So I think he really, it's really been brought to his attention that, hey, this is a serious threat. He is bringing on good people that have spoken out about all the bad things that have happened since 2020 in terms of the far left and everything like that. So I don't know. It'd be pretty interesting to see what happens, and how quickly things move, because by all indications, I mean, day one is just going to be off to the races.
Yeah. Speaking of sanctuary cities, Trump, what's your take on Mayor Eric Adams in the last 48 hours saying he's going to try to use his mayoral power to bypass sanctuary city law to work directly with Donald Trump and Tom Homan to get illegal immigrants out of the country? Some are saying he's just doing this as a pardon. I think he's been pretty clear from day one. As the mayor of New York, he doesn't really know what to do with all of the illegal immigrants and the financial costs and the crime that has come with that. What's your take on the mayor coming out and publicly making these statements?
Well, I mean, New York and Chicago and Denver, I mean, those places have really felt the financial crush, in addition to just the people, the acute amount of people coming in such a short amount of time. Because he did campaign. I mean, he was campaigning proudly that we are a sanctuary city. We're a city of immigrants and all that. But I think, again, once as was common under the Biden administration, when the reality hit, okay, well, this is what a sanctuary city means. Where not only do you have to, you by your own standards, you're obligated to financially provide for all these people, and oh, by the way, now we've got these criminal gangs like Tren de Aragua now being a major problem in your city. I mean, that's kind of hard to ignore. Now, that's not to say that other Democratic mayors and governors that we've seen come out recently, right? No, they are very much deciding to ignore the mandate that Trump was given by the American people. I mean, the rightward shift within these blue cities. I mean, obviously, I wasn't expecting Chicago to turn red, but if you listen to any of the city council meetings from Chicago, from New York, I mean, these are deep blue, black neighborhoods, and they sound like they're coming right out of a Trump rally in Alabama, saying we got to close the border, we got to get rid of all these people. You're taking care of them more than you're taking care of us, and that's why we saw that rightward shift, even in blue cities. So I don't necessarily. I mean, look. I mean, we can speculate all day, but I think for Adams, it's more specifically he doesn't want that financial burden anymore. I mean, it's cost them billions of dollars to how. I mean, and then also that trickles down into, because I mean, I've traveled to New York City a lot since the crisis for different reasons. But I mean, the average hotel stay in New York City for just an average hotel is $500-600 a night, which would, I mean, and that's because there's so many other hotels that are being used as shelters, right? So obviously that takes a hit on tourism. I mean, so there's so many trickle down effects from this, and that's why I think during the election, viewing the migrant crisis with the economy as two separate things was not a good way of looking at it, because they're deeply connected, right? And so and that's part of the reason why I'm down here in Mexico right now to talk to migrants to say, hey, what do you think about Trump winning? What do you think about what are your plans going to be if you don't make it to the border by the 20th? And we've had some pretty interesting responses, some easy to guess responses, but it just shows how at least with the American people, that they're fed up with all this. And so I think Eric Adams is just doing the practical thing, because he doesn't want to, he wants to stop spending all this money that they're kind of running out of.
Yeah, I think there may be like a pragmatic side where it's like, okay, just common sense tells me it's not smart to take from taxpayers and give to non-taxpayers that aren't working, not contributing. So then he kind of had this, can we get work visas? But then from a selfish side, getting reelected, you steal a bunch of taxpayer money and give it to other people, and they don't want to reelect you. And so also he's now dealing with being indicted and his staff, members being investigated. So there could be some selfish motive in there. I don't know if you saw this or not. I know you're down in Mexico, but Time Magazine is seriously considering awarding Kamala Harris as Person of the Year. I mean, she lost an election. She made life more expensive for every American, especially seniors. She made the country less safe. 15 million illegals came in the country as the borders are. More people died under her than under Trump from COVID. She backed forcing vaccination on workers, women, pregnant women, spent over $1 billion in 100 days, $20 million in debt. What on earth makes her Person of the Year other than being a woman of color that's vice president? Like, nothing new.
Well, I mean but that's her whole political career, essentially. I mean, that's all. I mean, that's why it's crazy, because people kind of forget because of how crazy the time period was. But Biden picked her to be his VP after George Floyd, it was after the riots started. I mean, so that's literally a big reason, I believe, why she was picked in the first place. Even though when she ran, she didn't even make it to the Iowa caucus. I mean, she was like 7th or something. I mean, she didn't even. She was not even qualified. I mean, and that's what's crazy to think. Then, okay, I'm going to drop out, and then this is going to be the person that's going to take on Trump, right? So I guess, I mean, if Time wants to do that, I would hope it would be in a honest way to say, here's a Time Person of the Year of a prime example of how disastrous a politician could be, right? But I think you and I both know that's not the route that they would take if they were to go ahead and do that. Because I mean, yeah, even just from a campaign perspective with the election, you're right. I mean, I personally am glad that someone who was given the most amount of money in an election, I mean, over $1 billion, and they end up with $20 million in debt in 100 days. I mean, do you want someone to run the country that way? I mean, and obviously that's not just a Democrat thing; it's the unit party in D.C. But that for her, especially, to try to and bring those people along into the federal government, no, that doesn't work. And so, I think kind of to go back to when we're talking about the migrants and the economy, because in the midterms, right, 2022, a lot of people were expecting this red wave, right, because there was a border crisis, there was Afghanistan withdrawal, right, but a lot of those issues, besides the economy, was kind of far removed at that point. But then the border crisis and the migrant crisis really kind of reached a peak in the summer of 2023. And that's when it was hard for the blue cities to hide. That's when Eric Adams, he was saying this is going to destroy New York City. That's when they started to become more vocal about how big of a problem it was. And even the more sympathetic, the more Democrats were sympathetic to the migrants, they were coming out and saying, well, hey, we need money. They were saying that at the very least. So, and then that's when people started to see it was more in their face, right? And then when you have Harris on The View saying, no, I wouldn't do anything different from what Biden has done, I mean, it's a game over. I mean, because then people say, well, the economy sucks. We have all these people here that are causing all these problems, causing all this money. We're less safe at home and abroad. I mean, I genuinely don't see how they thought that this was going to be a victory. Or, I mean, a lot of them were saying it was going to be an easy victory because you're right. It's like, well, it's a black woman, black Indian woman, and she's a senator. She was an AG. So, of course, this is a slam dunk. Yeah, it just really shows the hubris and how out of touch, in my belief, Democrats are at the national level. And again, that's not to say Republicans don't have some of their issues, but their messaging on the issues was way better because they weren't telling the American people, "No, you're wrong. You just feel that way." But here's how it actually is. When in fact, of course, that's not how things actually were.
Yeah. Republicans do have their issues. So I want to bring up my final question, and I know you've got to get on to your special mission down there in Mexico. I appreciate you coming on. What are your thoughts on Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Joni Ernst behind the scenes trying to disrupt the nominations that Donald Trump has put forward for example, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense. You now have people like Charlie Kirk, Elon Musk, others that are saying, if you don't put the MAGA selected Trump people in office, we will primary you, we will come after you, we will get somebody in that has this new line of thinking. Is this MAGA versus Rhino? What are your thoughts on all of that?
I mean, yeah, I mean, this is just typical of deep red politicians. I mean, when you look at even like, because the Blaze is based in Dallas, right? So we're very attuned to what happens at the state level with Texas, and you just see how it's a complacency issue. It's an issue that they get too comfortable. They don't feel the heat because primary voters do push them past the primary, even if there is not or no one steps up to really make sure that they're held accountable to they're held accountable to their electorate. And then that's why you then get people who think they know better for example, like with these nominations. And so I think they're kind of wising up to that, at least in the Senate side of things. I think just as in general, I think there needs to be a lot of change when it comes to the national movement, and like obviously besides Trump and kind of his pick, because again, there's a reason why he won, right? There's a reason why he did get the popular vote. There's a reason why he flipped all those swing states, or he brought them back into the fold. This is a moment that the national GOP really can't afford to waste. I mean, because I hate to talk about another election, but the midterms are not that far away. And if they don't deliver at least something, on at least some of these issues by then of course Republicans are not going to go out and vote for these people, because like, we gave you this mandate, we gave you all this energy, we gave you all this momentum, and you did jack squat with it. I mean, that's kind of what happened with Trump's first term with Republicans in Congress, right? They had all three branches of government for the first 2 years, and not a whole lot was done. And so I think this time is going to be different. That being said, I'm not I hate to be in the prediction game, because politics always, as fun as it can be and as great as it can be to watch and observe and report on it, it's also very frustrating, because you think, how did this come to be when you have all these things that are going right? But I really do think just even with Trump just surviving these very serious attempts on his life, I mean, that gives him the kind of, who are you to say this? Literally, I mean, they've been saying it. I've taken a bullet. Why can't you just vote on the things that the electorate wants? So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what Congress will do, because obviously Trump's going to do a lot in terms of executive orders, but those are temporary, based on administration, and those only go so far. And so again, it's going to have to fall on Congress. And I know they hate doing work, but they're going to have to make sure they deliver for the American people, because and really quick, I mean, the prime example is with the Latino voters, like in South Texas and Miami. I mean, I've been to South Texas a lot for the border crisis. I mean, these were very deep blue counties, electorate for decades, and they flipped. Virtually every single border county except for El Paso, and that's just because El Paso is a bigger city, it's more Democratic. But even then, that El Paso also shifted rightward on this recent election. And so this is that's majority Hispanic, majority Latino. They call themselves Tejanos. I mean, they don't even say that they're Latino. They say that that's how proud these people are. And they've been ignored by the Democratic Party for a long time, but especially when it came to the border crisis, because Biden screwed it up on purpose. And so the National Democratic Party thought that they could ignore those people because they're far removed from DC. They're just working class people. And so the Republican Party, if they deliver for them, they can secure their votes for a very long time. But again, it's incumbent on the Republicans to not forget who put them in the position that they are in now.
Yeah. I get asked if I'm Latino often. I speak Spanish, but with a very, very thick gringo accent. But I don't pretend to understand Latinos and Hispanics and the culture and all of that. But what do you think the main reasons were that they shifted towards Trump? Was it family values? Was it religious values? Was it a squeeze on their pocketbook? What are your main thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a combination of everything, right? Because and not to be put too much in the identity politics of stuff, but Latino families and Latino voters are just like every other voter, right? They want a safe community, they want a strong economy, they want opportunities. They don't want, like in the border counties, they don't want thousands of people going through their town and in their backyards. Even, I mean, there was a lot of that because the borders open all of a sudden. And then you look at the culture war stuff when it comes to transit, when it comes to like boys in girls sports, right? And it's not even at the college level, but at a younger level than that. So it was just a combination of everything, right? And particularly again with the border communities, obviously, I would say the border issue was probably one of the number one issue or number two. But then you look at Miami-Dade County, again, historically deep blue. Their reason was because obviously it's a different type of Latinos, by and large. It's their concerns about socialism and this. They see the Democratic Party just getting more and more unhinged on certain things when it comes to the economy. I mean, again, Harris was talking about doing all these things with the government, with the economy, and they're all saying, "Whoa, hold up here! Like, my family have seen this before. I personally have seen this before. This is how it starts. This is how government just overreaches when it comes to personal freedoms and economic freedom, and the next thing you know, we're end up like Venezuela or Cuba." So I mean, Latinos aren't a monolith. There's a lot of different places, but I mean, they're all united in just kind of the basic things of what everyone wants, from Texas all the way to upstate New York. So it's a little tongue in cheek, but it's also when you look at like when Democrats were pushing Latinx, right? The non-binary, to not offend anybody, to not assume their gender with using the A or the O. I mean, that was kind of that was a big slap in the face, and people kind of think, why is that? And it's because you have consultants, politicians, media companies basically telling Latinos, you're wrong. You don't know you're wrong and bigoted, but don't worry, we're going to come in and we're going to fix that for you because you don't know better. I mean, just how insulting and condescending that is to hear that. And so that's why there was a big pushback for that. And that's why for this recent National Hispanic Heritage Month, not a lot of places compared to 2 years ago were using Latinx. There was a few, but big companies either were just saying Latino or they were saying Hispanic. They weren't using Latinx. And so that's kind of personally a small victory, because whenever I saw an example of that, I would just tell them to shut up.
Okay, I never picked up on the fact that Latinx had to do with gender and gender-based language.
Well, because that's where the whole language is gendered. I mean, so it's not
the whole language is gendered.
You can't just have Latinx and then everything else. That's what I'm saying. It's insinuation that the entire thing needs to be redone based on our opinion of today.
Wow.
I mean, and so and look, and actually, it's very funny. I've been actually talking, like, for example, like my drivers here, and just random people. I've been asking them, "Oh, do you know what the word Latinx is or Latinx?" And they all just look at me like I'm talking in a different language. And once I explain it to them, this is what they were pushing in the United States. They always say, "Oh, that's so stupid. That's so dumb." And that's just coming from Mexicans. So it's not an insignificant thing that had an effect on the starting of the souring of the Latino electorate on Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, almost everyone I have rubbed shoulders with, from Cubanos to Venezuelans to Mexicans to Puerto Ricanos, they don't mind that it's a gender-based language, and they know a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and there's not a lot of crossover. Once you start hitting New York City, the New Ricans, they're a little bit more open to things like that. So, well, Julio, I appreciate you coming on. If people want to follow you, where can I push them? Twitter, Substack?
Yeah, so they can follow me on X. It's Julio_Rosas11. And my Substack is my name, so JulioRosas.substack.com. They can find me at the Blaze, where I'm here on assignment for the Blaze. I will be putting out the package from what I've found in all the interviews and stuff. Later this week, we're aiming for Wednesday, and X is my main. That's where I always kind of post my most up to date stuff along with my Substack.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'll put those direct links down below. Be safe. I look forward to seeing your reporting on what people are thinking about Trump as they move from South America, China, Russia, Ukraine, all up through Central America as they try to get into the United States. Thank you very much. Be safe, and we'll have you back on the show in the future.
Of course. Thank you.